Welcome to the Museum Association of the Caribbean's fifth and final artist talk for our online Pan-Caribbean exhibition, COVID, Collecting Our Voices in the Caribbean and its Diaspora. My name is Natalie Urquhart. I'm a board member and immediate past president of the Museums Association and director and chief curator of the National Gallery of the Cayman Islands. For those not familiar with MAC, our mission is to create a network for museums and cultural professionals around the 4 linguistic regions of the Caribbean, as well as professionals working in Caribbean museology from around the globe. We've been supporting museums from 1987, helping to develop standards and best practice, serving as advisors to governments and the public on museum development, exchanging information and ideas, connecting organizations locally and internationally, and conserving and preserving our shared natural cultural heritage. This online exhibition represents the culmination of a series of initiatives that MAC has organized in the past 18 months in response to the pandemic, starting with the MAC COVID survey, which helped us to identify concerns across the region, and which in turn led to the MAC Pandemic Support Series, providing training in digital strategy, health and safety measures, and advocacy. In addition, we hosted the MAC In Conversation series, which was an opportunity to hear firsthand from museum professionals about the impact of the pandemic on their organizations, their teams, and their response efforts. We've also shared this news in international surveys and on several panels relating to the Caribbean specific experience. If you've missed some of these sessions, they can all be accessed via the MAC website, caribbeanmuseums.org. Responding to the pandemic and its impact on our creative sector, this exhibition, Collecting Our Voices in the Caribbean and its Diaspora, seeks to bring together voices from across the region to illuminate, through creative expression, how people are living and moving through this crisis. It features work by 27 Caribbean artists from the English, French, Spanish, and Dutch-speaking region, with representation from 10 countries, including the Bahamas, the Cayman Islands, French Guiana, Guadeloupe, Guyana, Haiti, Martinique, Jamaica, Puerto Rico, and Suriname. It is our hope that the exhibition has been a source of inspiration for our community, and that it has provided the participating artists with a platform through which to reach new audiences during a lockdown and beyond. Before moving on to meeting our panelists today, I'd like to recognize the MAC COVID Collecting Committee members, Amanda Coulson, Tasha Doge, Rosie Gordon-Wallace, and Corinne Martin, who curated this exhibition, with support from John Cox, Cassie Edwards, Cara Bledsoe, Joanne Hippolyte, Romel Shearer, and myself. The project is made possible through support from the Diaspora Vibe Cultural Arts Incubator in Miami, Fundación 1408 in Aruba, the National Gallery of the Bahamas, Memorial Act in Guadeloupe, and the National Gallery of the Cayman Islands. The exhibition itself can still be visited via the resources section on MAC's website, where it will remain online until November 26th. It is now my great pleasure to welcome our panelists today. We have 4 of the 5 originally planned, and I'm going to introduce them in order. Please do remember to add your questions into the Q&A section at the end, because we're really hoping to encourage a conversation and a dialogue today. Unfortunately, our very first panelist, Jemima Johnson, was unable to join us at the last minute, but I want to make sure that we recognize her wonderful contribution to this exhibition. So I'll share her work and a little bit about her bio before moving on. Jemima Johnson has been a professional fine artist for 18 years, specializing in figurative work in oil. She had her first commission at the age of 17 and later pursued a short-lived career in advertising before securing a London agent who helped pave the way for her fine art career. Jemima works regularly exhibiting in London and Jamaica, her place of birth, as well as Hampshire, Yorkshire, and Ireland. She has clients in the UK and Europe, including many from the East Indian community, where portraiture held in very high regard. The work that Jemima has in the exhibition is very clearly a self-portrait called Taking Up Space. This is a large oil on canvas work. And for the artist, this piece was really the epitome of isolation. The growing belly confined in a small space. The color palette is bleak, much like lockdown was for so many of us, and represents the monotony of idleness whilst being kept cooped up inside. But for the artist, it's the drab cocoon that is transformative. Just like a butterfly breaks out and evolves, we are to be set free to take flight to freedom. And it's a beautiful work. And I think one of the reasons that we selected the series of artists for the panelists today is to show how different the response has been to lockdown based on their works that each of the artists creates in the context that they're creating in. So this is a very unique work in the exhibition and one of the few figurative paintings that we have in the collection. It's now my great pleasure to welcome Miguel Coveld, who is with us today. And I think if you look at the, if you've got gallery view on while we share the screen, you should be able to see Miguel in the corner there, and we'll certainly meet him with a bigger screen after we've looked at these wonderful slides of the artwork today. Miguel is also known as his performance persona, Tumpy Flow. And Miguel, am I pronouncing that correctly? Okay, good, thank you. Although educated as a civil technical engineer, Miguel operates as a social researcher while leading Mission 21, and he's going to speak to that in just a moment. Mission 21 is a network that is related to the creative, intuitive practice of coaching. As an independent artist represented by the brand EdK, and via his persona, Tumpy Flow, Miguel reflects on sociopolitics using visual language and creative writing to activate social change through interventions and agency. As cyborg feminist, he combines creative documentation with sustainability and change. Currently, she is focusing on understanding art systems in Latin America and is embarked on an international mentoring program awarded through the Architopia Foundation in Puebla, Mexico. Miguel, it's a pleasure to meet with you on the platform today. And if you'll unmute your mic, we'd love to hear from you about your work, which I'm bringing to the screen now. Again, a very, very different approach to the theme of the pandemic. It's called Neverending Story with a question mark. And I do want to talk about that question mark at the end. It's very, very fitting for the moment that we're moving through. So tell us about this piece.
Yes, the piece was installed in 2021. Thank you for this moment, Natalie. And the work is made using a wooden casket, wooden and clay mask, paper, textile, glue, reused canvases. And those canvases were largely from previous processes, often related to creative workshop to teens or any form of dialogue with other creative teens and counselors. The installation intersects Alida Neslo, which is a Surinamese theater maker, her vision of inclusion. And in the context of Suriname, she refers to it as Alakondre, which is the lingua franca for all nations in Suriname. Also, it is inspired by Donna Haraway's Cyborg Manifesto and an argument of Emmanuel Levinas, who argues about ethic of love, and finally by Italian philosopher, sociologist, who talks about the production of subjectivity. So in this piece, I try to bring all these four approaches together. The work symbolizes a promise, and it measures about 3.5 to 4 meters in length, 1 meter 90 high, and about approximately 1 meter wide. As an intersection of the real and the symbolical, it demonstrates a postmodern economy based on inclusion. And I specifically refer to that, to this node, because the two-dimensional, the paper cuttings, refer to what I call butterfly currency as a critic to our current economic system. more specifically relating to how in this new visualization or imagination of this new economy that I allowed myself to visualize, it's a relevant part. Investing in the other is a relevant part. That's why I refer to the piece as a way of mining material through a longer period, basically between 2015 and 2020, through interactions, like I said, in Suriname with other creatives and youth, Brazil, Peru, Mexico, and especially the USA, as this need to bring the my practice of counseling into the creative documentation was a spin-off of my participation in the alumni ICLP, which is International Visitors Leadership Program. I think it's a mouthful, but to give you, in fact, it's a very layered project that has many different approaches, but not only as a critic, but also as a way of social imagining, because I think it's important, especially in the crisis, to allow ourselves to be imagining our new world. Yes, I think that's a nice way to end this description of the work.
Well, and just actually to just draw on that, there was something that stood out in your artist statement for me, and I'm going to sort of paraphrase this because it's speaking about this new future and the imagination space. Visualization, the work is about visualization that seeks to transform violence in its historical context into an imaginary and futuristic non-national force. And I think that is I was very honored to speak to Renee Tassari in a different panel last year when we're talking about this idea of the collaborative, the multinational, non-national force, which is, I think, so incredibly relevant, not just to Suriname, but to the region that we live in. And then you also go on to say, referring to the limitless possibility of space, which I found incredibly moving, both having read about this work, but also reflecting on the moment that we're in. And it seems to me like a journey that you've taken over several years, working in this very collaborative way. And I find it quite fascinating that it's this moment of isolation that is really bringing this all together, taking the collaborative in a moment of space, personal space, and creating this very, very dynamic and moving work that speaks to so many levels of where we are at and the experiences that we're trying to navigate in this moment. Thank you very much. And we're going to jump back into this experience of sort of creativity in lockdown as a group discussion at the end. So we're going to move on now to CK. Thank you so much, Miguel. We'll speak with you again in just a moment. CK Ledesma, and I think you're there. If you can wave, if people are also seeing this in a bar, CK is just under Miguel. So it's my great pleasure to introduce CP Ledesma, a transdisciplinary queer artist from San Juan, Puerto Rico, living in the diaspora in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which is quite far removed from Puerto Rico. Their work centers around explorations of intersectionality of identity as a departure point to play with the realities of diasporic life while exploring culture, history, place, ancestry, and experiences. Ledesma is a 2020 Mary L. Knoll Fellow who has served as an artist in residence for the Cesar Chavez Drive Business Improvement District in Milwaukee, the Mitchell branch of the Milwaukee Public Library, and at Casa Candela in Valle, Puerto Rico. Their work has been exhibited nationally and internationally at the Racine Art Museum and through this current exhibition of the Museums Association of the Caribbean, and most notably within their community. Besides art practices, they are passionate about serving their community while building authentic relationships and the liberation of BIPOC people. They founded Kosesha, did I pronounce that right? Kosesha, a creative space, a community-focused space that centers on connections, understanding, and the building of togetherness through creative engagement, mutual aid, and the arts. And again, something I'd love to unpack in this moment of isolation, this sense of community being so critical to the moving forward. But let's first visit the work in the exhibition, which is Floating on Nostalgia, Drowning in the Colony. CK.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you everybody for being here. Like Natalie said, I'm CP Ledesma. My pronouns are he, she, they. I use all three. I feel very comfortable in all three, so please feel free to refer to me as you please. I also, like Natalie mentioned in my bio, I moved between places, between Puerto Rico and Milwaukee, Wisconsin, but I find myself right now in Milwaukee, which is the traditional lands of Native peoples, the Potawatomi, the Ojibwe, the Ottawa, the Fox, the Ho-Chunk, the Oneida, the Menominee, and the Sauk. So just want to take a minute to recognize them as the caregivers of this land, present, past, and future. So yeah, this piece, I was traveling back and forth between Milwaukee and Puerto Rico. Most of my family actually lives on the island. And I was coming back home at the beginning of 2020 when the pandemic began and the lockdown issues were happening. And I was still in the process of grieving. A very important person in my life had just passed away, which, you know, when you're still grieving, you're moving from place to place, you're still carrying that with you. Doesn't matter about the location or the physicality of it. And I was coming into this home to be with my family to help out with all the new realities that we were going through. And nostalgia kept on coming back to me. I was locked in my childhood home with my mother, with my younger brother, and in the home that my grandparents built for us. And nostalgia was a recurring theme that kept on coming back and forth to me. And during the lockdown, I was very much a shortage in materials that I would usually use. Like I'm sure most artists found themselves being in because we, just couldn't go outdoors or be around folks. And walking through my neighborhood, I found these pieces. Assemblage is not a medium that I usually find myself materializing ideas or thoughts. But in this moment in time, it felt very, very pressing. And the two were found in very different times of the pandemic. The iron chair, which is very reminiscent and nostalgic of childhood, I think, specifically for me. Like my grandparents had these rocking chairs in their backyard, and I know that many of my friends' families also had them in the backyard. So it's already this object that is very relatable for a lot of people, that we like sort of grew up with it. It's part of our lineage, it's part of our location. And it was all dismantled. I found it at the beginning of the pandemic. I actually found the full sets and I was like, I have to bring this home. This is coming home with me. And it just sort of stayed in the back of my studio space. It was just sort of like living and lingering there. And I realized that it could be a material for something more, right? And as the pandemic progressed, the floating device came to me through a cousin much later on. And for me, it was juxtaposing opposite things, right? One is sturdy, one is structured, one is rigid, the other one is inflatable, the other one is fluid, and the material is plastic, is malleable, one is hard. But also combining these two, I think it sort of encapsulated in a sort of playful way, a very deep-rooted feeling that I had in the moment that I didn't realize I had, of, like it says in the title, floating on nostalgia, which I was, right, still grieving the love and the passing of a dear one. But then again, being from Puerto Rico and living between places, in Puerto Rico being a colony of the United States, where we don't have access to many of the things that the United States might offer and or have, right? So we are always sort of living in this shadow. So juxtaposing these two seemed like the proper sentiment for me at the moment, right? And also visualizing the things that were happening around me within my home, within my community, and not only in Puerto Rico, but also here in Milwaukee, right? As you mentioned, Natalie, I do work in mutual aid spaces, and it seemed to be the sentiment of folks, right? Like longing to and having this feeling of nostalgia of how we used to be pre-pandemic, pre-lockdown, but also sort of like being grounded in the now, right? And not being able to stay afloat with how we were surviving in that moment in time. But ultimately, I think it also represents a good side, right? Because I think the floating device is a life-saving object,
Yeah.
right? It's not necessarily something that like the title says, drowning. It's not something that for the loss of life. It's more for the rising, the floating, the staying on the surface, the being able to breathe. And a lot of times it also like, this feels kind of comfortable to me. If I were to sit in this chair, it feels
Yes.
comfortable, right? It's not made out of wood, it's not rigid. It feels like you could sit, you could rock, you can contemplate. And those were all the ideas that I was working with when this piece came together.
And of course, immediately it speaks to sustainability as well. There's something else we're grappling with so much in the region. And, you know, a couple of the themes that you touched on, this idea of the nostalgia being something that we all can share. I mean, I think we've all had that experience as young people, the sort of metal garden chairs in the region and the sort of the patina of them, the rust from being outside in the tropical weather that we have. And while it's a very thoughtful and serious approach to the topic of grieving, that the pink and the vibrancy, as you say, of the life raft that we're all desperately hanging on to in this moment, it is it's a very powerful piece using very simple found materials that has a very impactful presence. And again, one thing I just really took away in your artist statement, because it's this notion of rocking on this rocking chair and this sort of sense of time. You say we wait, we float on many things, drowning in others, rocking, sitting, waiting. And again, incredibly evocative to this this experience that we have all gone through, and this idea that we're still waiting for change and decisions, and that is looking likely to be further and further away than we initially expected. So that need for patience, yeah, thank you so much. It's a beautiful work, very exciting. Now I know I just got a message as well that Jemima is actually trying to reach us, so we're hoping that she's going to join us, and we will get back to speaking to her at the end of the session if we're able to connect her, which is great news. Thank you so much, CK. And we are going to move on now to Iria, who is with us as well. If she can put on her video or wave. I'm not seeing you in my screen, so I'm going to scroll down. So there you are. Okay, great. We have another Puerto Rican artist, and I love the fact that you guys know each other and you went to middle school together. So we have a great sort of community already, even before we jumped on and met each other on the panel. So Puerto Rican artist Iria Prieto was born in Madrid, Spain, and grew up in her mother's native Calle, Puerto Rico. From an early age, Iria had a deep connection with the visual arts, especially painting. Coming from a family of artists, she was always exposed to a wide variety of art forms, including music, literature, photography, ballet, and filmmaking, all of which inform her current body of work, which we'll speak to. Iria holds a Bachelor of Fine Art in Painting from the Maryland Institute College of Art, and she has studied at Parsons New School for Design in Paris, Studio Art International Center in Florence, and the ICAR International Film and Television School in Paris. Her work has been exhibited in New York, Barcelona, Florence, Paris, and San Juan, among others. Her studio is currently based in Brooklyn, New York. Welcome, Iria. And I'm going to bring up her beautiful image. And I know this is a very, again, emotionally charged piece for you, back to back. So if you could tell us a little bit about this and also how it relates to the wider context of your practice. And I just want to acknowledge Jemima, who has just joined us. We can see her there. So Iria, back to you.
Okay, hi, thank you, Natalie. Hi from Brooklyn. So to begin talking about my piece, I want to talk a little bit about how I work. I approach painting in more of like an improvisational manner. meaning that I don't really plan the topic or the outcome of a piece. That's why this piece was so special to me. It's kind of appeared right at the right time, and it feels like a sign. It's like exoteric. I tend to allow intuition to take over with no expectations, usually resulting in abstract pieces. That's why I was surprised on this one. In this piece in particular, I came to the studio at a moment still processing the effects of the pandemic, the constraints, being away from my family in Puerto Rico, the impotency, the loss. It was kind of like I was in a catatonic state with really not wanting to do anything, found it pointless, by the way. But somehow I managed to go out to the studio and work. You know, I've been mourning the deaths of my grandfathers for most of 2020, amongst other very critical happenings that gave me so much anguish during that year. It was a big shock how it all went down. First, one passed away earlier in the year, and then the other one months later. As different as they were, both from their backgrounds to their nationalities, one being Spaniard and the other one Puerto Rican, they both kind of passed away a very similar way in a hospital, all alone, and from COVID-19. Hence the title Back to Back. So my approach in art, it's kind of like allowing and letting things flow through movements. So the piece kind of takes you wherever it wants to go with no clear map. It's more of an existential approach through meditative observation. I like to think that it's like the vital force that drives the painting instead of my ego or my judgment on how things should be like. The composition usually starts to take shape as I keep looking at it for longer periods of time and things get slowly into focus. It's like a music, you know, elements work towards a unison together to exist in the same space or world. It's like, you know, you have high pitches and low pitches and textures and things get pushed into the background or get erased completely. It all depends. It's like a feeling, like click. So following this unknown path is what guides the process, but it's also informed by my years of practice and my formation. It all works like muscle memory mixed with intuition. It's kind of like how the year went too. It was all an unknown path for all of us. In this piece, I use specifically spray paint, charcoal, and elements of collage that I glued on. Due to the financial constraints during the pandemic, I was having trouble affording art supplies or, like CK said, like going out to get some due to the restrictions. So I started to scout materials in my studio. Anything that I could use to stretch out a buck was welcome. So once I found this drawing that is actually the mirror image that you see in the painting in a sketchbook. It's a self-portrait I made years ago, but I forgot to fix it, you know, to apply fixative on the charcoal drawings. So over time, the image imprinted on the opposite side of the sketchbook, giving me a 2-for-1 type of deal. Like always, I automatically roll with it and I applied it. But then later, when I step back and I see how these figures are kind of talking to me and the painting, the emotions, in a way, it really touched me a lot to find out that it's kind of these images, it's me, but it's them, my grandfathers, in synchrony. It's a kind of a very powerful symbol in that alone. So yeah, the only thing I planned for this painting was the size before building it. Once the build was done, I just rolled with it automatically. And then I realized what it was about, but it was later in the game. I had been working on it for a while. So when I step back and I see what the piece represents, just this flow of like calm and love, went through me. It represents pretty much two pillars, big pillars of my life, sharing the token of life and death, sending me kind of a message of unity. Such a healing moment when I came to that realization. So yeah, not being able to attend to them at their moment of their last breath due to the pandemic travel bans and restrictions again, it was devastating for me. So making this piece at the time it was done, under the circumstances it was done, definitely works for me as a reconciliation with my frustration and my angst, and also served as a closure ritual of my own. I see it as a tribute, memorial piece to my grandfathers, their life, and a gratitude for mine to them. And also I hope this serves as a memorial for those who share the similar story of loss through a distance. And that's it. Thank you all for listening.
That's so beautifully evocative with the words that you've used to describe, and thank you so much for sharing what is very intimate and devastating experience. And I have a similar one myself, so I find this work quite difficult to sort of talk about, because as you said, it's it has that sort of effect. And listening to you kind of describe that process as well, it's sort of sent the hairs up on my arms right now. But I'm amazed when you said that it actually was originally a self-portrait, because it seems so beautifully fitting as a way of honoring these two pillars of your life, that they are sort of there in mirror image back to back and kind of holding up, holding you up, holding the generations up. But then there's this sense of sort of the spirit escaping, and the sort of beauty of going from the material world into the spiritual. It's a very impactful piece. And I know, having looked at some of your other work, this idea, and again pulling out from your statement, the lyric dance between the physical and the non-physical realms, I think is so beautifully captured in this very, very personal work. So thank you so much for sharing this. And I'm just sad that I can't see this in reality, because I think the size of it as well would have a remarkable impact to be able to stand in front of a piece like this and promote the healing that so many people are trying to find in this moment. So thank you so much for sharing what is such a personal story as well.
Thank you.
We are going to move on to Diraj. If he can, I just need to move my screen down so I can see him as well. Yes, there he is. Diraj Ramsamej, I think, Diraj, am I saying that correctly? I'm going to have you correct me before I move on. I've been trying to practice. Diraj. Yeah, great. Okay. Well, thank you for being with us today from Suriname. Diraj graduated from Nola Hatteman Art Academy in 2004. He also successfully completed his teacher's education and currently teaches art at secondary school in Suriname. He began his practice working more traditionally on oil on canvas, but now also paints with acrylic, as well as creating three-dimensional art, which we'll see today, and textile sculptures, which I went on your website, and the textile sculptures look fascinating. I'd love to learn more about those as well. Devryta's work has been shown in exhibitions in Suriname, the Netherlands, the USA, Trinidad and Tobago, and Aruba. And he's completed several artist in residency projects in Trinidad, Aruba, and Paris, France. In 2019, he had a large solo exhibition at the Reditex Arts Gallery in Suriname. It is the ordinary Surinamese people from Suriname, and their daily circumstances and struggles, as well as his own personal memories, that are important themes in his work. His work increasingly also includes critical commentaries on social and political issues. And here is the example of his work from two angles today. And if you go on to the virtual exhibition, I believe, Diraj, am I right? This is outside. This is in the sort of outside space of the virtual exhibition. There's a sort of sculpture part, I believe, and then you can also navigate the exhibition inside as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's,
Okay.
it's,
So
it's
just
in the outside,
yeah,
kind of a garden.
the garden area, exactly. So for the people watching, if you haven't been on and navigated the exhibition yet, do ensure to use the outside space as well as the virtual galleries inside, because this beautiful work is on display there. So tell me about this work. It's they Arbeiter, which translates to they work. Is that right?
What was your question?
The title, Viraj. Can you tell us about the title and then tell us about the work and the context of the work?
The title is the Arbeiter. Translated, it means the worker. I think I can explain more about the context where in what the work was made. Then maybe you can understand why the title.
Perfect.
Let's begin with this. This work was made for an exhibition at the Reditex Art Gallery last year. And this exhibition was about the view of the artist on 45 years independence of Suriname and the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the Surinamese people. So I created this artwork, and this artwork, as you know, the Arbeiter represents a Surinamese worker. Last year it was 45 years, now it's 46 years independence, almost 46 years independence. So after 46 years independence is still not developed. The work is still not developed like to become a prosperous citizen, and Suriname is also not not, let's say, a prosperous country yet. We are still struggling. The hoe with the workers symbolize the primitive. That I use that because if we were developed in those years, then I would maybe use a tractor as a symbol for modernism. So the worker and the workers also being shown by the big head corona. It's the small and sculpture behind the human figure, and that the symbolical the impact of the coronavirus on the already struggling Surinamese community. So this artwork is made of cement, it's made of sand, wood. I use also foam. I use chicken wire. I use textile. I use iron and trellis. And the outside layer, what you can feel, it's quite rough, and that is mostly cement. This artwork is 75 centimeters. That's the width. The height is 200 centimeters, and the depth is 108 centimeters. As already mentioned, that my work is mostly about it's dealing with social themes regarding the ordinary Surinamese people and their daily circumstances, their struggles. And furthermore, I also deal with in my artwork, I deal also with themes like memories and the mysterious nature of man. You also mentioned about the textile sculptures. Those are part of the Flexible Man project, and the Flexible Man project is about the current identity of us, of the people in Suriname, and I think also in the Caribbean, because we are brought from several places all over the world to the Caribbean, and here we formed our new identity or current identity by mixing our cultures, our traditions, and Miguel also mentioned the word a la Condre. That's that's also the theme of those textile sculptures. But there's more layers on it, but
and I'm sorry we don't have a picture to share of those, but I do want to encourage our audience as well to jump on the artist websites. We can share those as well in the chat and also via Matt, because these really are just sort of one sample of all of your wider practice, and a great chance to sort of get this initial introduction. Diraj, is this particular work, because it was a solo exhibition that you had at the Reditex Gallery?
no,
Was
this one?
Yeah, was this?
No, this was
later.
Part, yeah, it's later. It's part of the group exhibition in 2020.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. I was going to ask if there were several other variations of this work, but it sounds like this is the one for that exhibition. And is this practice of yours of sculpting with these multiple materials, is that also something that you practice regularly, or did you also find that materials were challenging to come by, as some of the other artists have shared during the lockdown? Because you guys were in lockdown for a while as well in Suriname, I think.
Yes, we were, and this is also made during the lockdown. But when I was a child, I think 6 or 7 years, my favorite material at that time too. I used to create small things. I don't call them art, but I used to create, and that was I used cement and wood. So this material has always been dear to me, but this is the first time I use cement on this scale. And even we have the lockdowns and that kind of stuff, but we already have we don't have access to art materials like fiberglass or acrylic paint or oil paint in Suriname. We need to import them. So these are materials we can find here: wood, natural materials, stones, cement. So this is something we already have access to.
You have access,
other materials like if you want to have best quality acrylic paint, best quality oil paint, everything of fiberglass and etc. Then you need to import them.
Yeah.
So this is our.
This is much more readily available and something we're very comfortable working with, clearly, because it's again another very moving interpretation of this experience, and I think particularly what I find thoughtful about this work is that you're connecting it back to this wider practice of yours about the challenges with development and the barriers that the community were facing even before the financial pressures that the pandemic has now unfortunately kind of exacerbated in all of our communities. So thank you so much, and we are going to talk more about that in just a moment. I'm going to invite Jemima, who is with us, and flip back to the beginning of our presentation so we can see her work. Jemima, I have already introduced you, so I think I'm going to ask you to just move straight in, if you would. I've told the audience a little bit about your the work in this exhibition that we have in front of us now. And if I can ask you to unmute your microphone. Oh, perfect. Thank you. So welcome. And now, are you in the UK currently?
I am in the UK, yeah.
It looks pretty dark outside.
Yeah, it's nearly midnight here.
Thank you for joining us so late.
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
wonderful.
thank you for having me. It's a real privilege.
Of course. So tell us about this work. This is your self-portrait.
This is an allegorical piece, yeah. I thought it was, I normally do self-portraits, like every year I have to do a self-portrait, but this year when I found out about the MAC, I thought it would be really perfect, especially how I felt it was very symbolic with everything that was happening, the isolation. And then just in June, obviously, there were the protests for Black Lives Matter and what it brought up. And a lot of people, there was quite a lot of discussion with friends from Black, Caribbean, African backgrounds, or minority backgrounds, and how we had already felt isolated throughout the years anyway. So having to be isolated under these extreme types of conditions, it's kind of like we've been mentally conditioned, unfortunately, to deal with this type of isolation. And there was a really powerful kind of thought for me behind that. So I felt like when I decided to create this piece, I thought it was super important to project that idea of isolation. But then also I was pregnant throughout the pandemic. So she's an original COVID baby. I don't know if my camera is on. Is it on?
I think, no, I think you've got a, there's a still, oh no, you're there now. You're there now.
Oh, okay. So yeah, this was a piece, I just felt it kind of summarized it itself, really. Pregnancy is very isolating anyway, and especially when it gets to the part where you get very heavily pregnant, you start thinking about lots of things. And in the process, I mean, you have to keep yourself mentally uplifted and spirited. I felt the best way to connect with myself in the period that we all experienced internationally was to kind of connect with my past. My daughter was born in August, which is the Jamaican Independence Month. Mm-hmm. And as well as the fact that it carried so many other things. It would have been like the Windrush anniversary as well at the end of summer. And all of my family are very Caribbean. You know, I have Trinidadian, St. Vincentian and Jamaican background. And I just thought of all of my family members, all of my ancestors who had to go through so many parts of their life. And here I was, you know, carrying, you know, the seed, our ancestry up until that point. And even though it was very isolating, you feel quite vulnerable. There's so much integrity as well you can find within yourself. And I wanted that to come through, even though, you know, I'm heavily pregnant. It was a terrible time for everybody. It still is for everybody. We're not completely through the worst of it. But I found there was so much to find in it. I wanted there to be something positive. Luckily for me, something positive came through the pandemic, which was my daughter. She was healthy. And that's all we can wish for. And I was healthy and everything was fine. But I just wanted this piece to be quite symbolic as kind of, you know, borrowing like strength from my past and my culture as well, and who I am and my identity.
And I think it's certainly, I remember talking to I was working with the curatorial team when we were placing the works online, and it was such a unique piece in the collections that had been submitted, that we were trying to find a space that it could sit on its own and really speak on its own, because I think there's an incredibly powerful moment that she's looking, or you're looking, you know, right out at the viewer. And as you said, there's a sense of the isolation, the monotony of the color, but there's a very strong sense of sort of personal strength coming through this work as well. And this sense, as you say, carrying the next generation, respecting your ancestors, but sort of being able to come and emerge out of all that we've collectively gone through, whether it's the pandemic or otherwise. I think, you know, and that viewpoint really encapsulates that strength. Again, a beautiful work. And I think you said in your artist statement, the idea of emerging from that cocoon space into the sort of the butterfly, the taking flight, and the freedom, which we're all, as you say, still seeking, because the moment has lasted a lot longer than we had originally anticipated.
Yeah.
And I think that, am I right in thinking, did you move just before or during, or sort of you moved between Jamaica and the UK, or have you been back in the UK throughout?
I've been in the UK throughout, yeah, I have. And actually, I can sympathise, and you said with yourself as well, I empathise with you, with Iria. She said she lost both her grandparents, and I recently lost my grandma, so she was like the last piece of like my family, so yeah.
And I think, well, thank you for sharing that again, because it's what the moment has done. In a way, we've been so isolated, but the more networks and community that we're finding through the sharing of this kind of creativity and through the conversations and the communities we're meeting that we might never have met if we didn't have kind of virtual networks, is actually bringing that sense of shared grief and understanding, I think, in a way that we might never have had access to otherwise.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm going to now end the PowerPoint so that we can get everybody on screen in a gallery view, because I do want to continue talking a little bit about this sense of, okay, stop share. I'm not very good at the tech side of things, so I'm hoping I'm getting this right. If everybody is watching, if you can turn your view onto gallery view, then we'll be able to see all of our speakers together, because we're now just hoping to have a bit of a conversation and dialogue. I don't think we need to be spotlit. If we can go onto gallery view generally, if that's possible. Perfect. I think that's happening right now. Perfect. There's 6 of us and we've got just the right amount of shared screen. So really talking to, you know, what Jemima had mentioned and what Iria has experienced as well. I work with a lot of artists in my own community in the Cayman Islands, and I run an art museum. But one of the things that we tried to flip into doing immediately was looking at how to support artists on the ground. Obviously, our borders have been closed, like many of yours, for so many months. And a lot of our sales of art and support for art comes from visitors to the island. So it's been a remarkably difficult time, both, you know, being limited with being able to sell or exhibit work. And our museums try to flip into more of a community space that supports the artists through grants, residencies, and all sorts of things like the professional development. But one of the things that we've talked a lot about is the impact of the pandemic, and particularly the lockdown at the beginning, which we thought maybe was going to be a short period of time. Half of the artists that I've spoken to really just couldn't create at all. The anxiety and the lockdown experience was just too overwhelming, and it actually limited creativity. And then for many others, it was the sort of the forced, the framework, I guess, that we were living in actually allowed people to focus on creativity and let go of all of the other noise that we often have to navigate in our daily lives. So I was just very interested, obviously you've all been creating because we've seen that, but how each of you experienced that initial journey with your practice and how it was affected by these limitations. Jemima, you're not muted, so I'm going to throw the question to you first, and then please just jump in, everybody.
Okay. Well, I'm a figurative artist, so generally I meet clients, and I focus mostly on portraiture. So that's a huge part of the creative process, just being able to see people, be able to meet with people. So when you're not able to do that, it takes a large part of the process away, and then you kind of lose inspiration. and not even necessarily with clients or with people who are commissioning pieces, just in general, it's just life in general, being able to watch people. I really enjoy people watching. I love, like now we've got the students that are going back to university and listening to the laughter and that excitement. It's so nice, it's so welcome. But when everything was so quiet, it was really daunting. And I mean, for most artists, we are really important throughout history because we're able to depict the times, and not being able to do that because we're not allowed to collectively be outside, there's nothing for us to capture. And everybody was like plugged in online. In the end, I had to take myself off online and just go through like catalogues of work I'd done and just revisiting the masters and learning about technique again and just becoming a student, like mostly focusing on how to be an artist, how to be creative. Because for me personally, luckily, it's not something I ever lose. It's literally like within me, it's in my nature just to constantly create. But to be without people, that's not natural. So I did really suffer with that. I found that really difficult.
Wonderful, thank you for sharing that. And again, quite a unique experience because of the type of practice that you have as well. It wouldn't have even occurred to me that not being able to meet people face to face, of course, would have a huge impact in how you work. Thank you. I'll open the floor to anyone else that would want to jump in. Miguel? Yeah, you're muted.
Yes, thank you, Natalie. Actually, it's funny because in my case, at the beginning of the pandemic, when the world was going on lockdown, everything was a chaos, I felt good because of the amount of creativity that was bottling within me. And also because just shortly before the pandemic, I started the process of processing the, the collages that I was making or the paper cutting as a metaphor for symbolically encountering. So when the world went on lockdown, I basically felt that this was the time to kind of have a moment to kind of dive deeper into the process that I've been developing for a longer time. So for me, it was a great opportunity. And what's interesting is that I used that opportunity to actually widen that space in which I was basically interacting symbolically and developing it more into a way of providing this reflective space to other artists. And for example, I remembered coming up with a concept of 222, and because that's the way I have been processing the collages instead of 22. And for example, Diraj was involved in that project and so many others, and it was just an amazing time. So it once again, now it's too long going on, but in the beginning I was really happy. I was like, yes. So I wanted to share that with you guys.
Thank you. And it's a real divide, isn't it, between how people have responded. Diraj, you were just mentioned. Do you want to jump in and share?
Yeah. I must say, in the beginning, I felt the same. It was like, yeah, now we have all the time to focus on art. But I'm also a teacher, so that then consumes a lot of time too. So the enjoyment of having the free time to focus full time on art was of a short time.
Yes.
So, but I think during this period, I realized that we have still an advantage of living in the Caribbean in this tropical zone, that we maybe also the way the country is organized, that even during lockdown you're still free. Not free to go on the streets, but you have your outside your house you have a lot of space, you have the trees. So I know not everything like that, but for me, it is, the nature is also inspiring. And further, going further with the lockdowns and this COVID, then I started losing some inspiration, because my art is at the end still inspired by the social themes, the society and everything. And like, at some point, it looks like everything is going just like in one wave. It's not dynamic. So yeah, but I'm still trying. And during this period, I also experienced and experimented with new materials, new things, and in the future, I can present them to you guys.
Look forward to it. And thank you for your work teaching throughout, because I have to say, you know, some of the unspoken heroes of this last 18 months, teachers adapting online, has been just remarkably inspiring. And so thank you for navigating that at the same time as your creative practice. Iria.
So for me, it sort of started similar. It was a moment of stopping doing everything else that I was doing, distracting from my practice, because of course we have other jobs to sustain, yes. Menial jobs, I guess. So it was all good until you realize that the time passing, it's just elongating, and all of a sudden you're like out of resources, you can't have interaction, you kind of feel super isolated, and then it kind of starts eating you up. And for me, it's also the deaths of family members and friends and loved ones. Yeah, it just became a huge weight to bear, and I couldn't see the point on any moving even, you know. It's just too uncertain, the path we were walking in. But something that came out of it was just me realizing how important it is to have meaningful human interaction, how we are social beings and we do drive from each other. You know, it's like it put in perspective, what type of life do I want to live? What type of artist am I, or I want to portray? So in a way, it kind of, everything collapsed and the screens went down, and it's like, it bared me exposed and vulnerable. And I realized that's it. We were all in this together, and we're one of the same. So for me, this just becomes like this crusade to inspire and allow people to see things from a different perspective and to connect us with what makes us human, because we're here for a short amount of time. So we better take advantage of it.
Absolutely, thank you. Yes.
Sorry, I just always go deep like that.
But it's remarkable in that it's given us, it's allowed us, right? It's allowed us to rethink and think maybe we do want a significant change in a way that you get on that hamster wheel and you never get off it. This has been a moment that we're all starting to kind of rethink what that future could be. And CK, I know your practice as well is partly collaborative and socially charged. So again, being removed physically from that community must have been a challenge.
Yeah, it absolutely was. At least for the first, I think, 2 months of it. My mother is a nurse, so I moved from Milwaukee, Wisconsin to move in with my mother and my younger brother to also be sort of like his virtual teacher, because he was going into virtual school, and having to live in a home with a younger kid who is virtually learning, with a mother who is dealing with patients and exposed, right, to COVID-19. The first 2 months were like a very huge adjustment curve for everybody. also, like, I'm an adult and I'm moving with my mother, who's another adult, right? That's another sort of like butt headings there. But immediately, I found that as somebody who really thrives in community engagement, and really my work exists in the center of it, but also around, that I could use mail as a way to connect with people. So I started investigating and investing and getting more involved with food security here in the city of Milwaukee, but also in Puerto Rico. So I began a project where I started mailing food to people. I focused and I honed in on one specific dish, and I sent it around to the United States all over. And it was a form of like engagement, of cultural sharing, of sharing at a distance, of isolation. It also came with a Spotify playlist for you to listen while you were cooking. So it was a whole experience, right? That we could share at a distance in your own home, and we could sort of not feel as isolated as we felt, right? And I asked the participants to send back any sort of documentation they wanted. So I think it was really intense in the beginning of the pandemic, but it really shifted the way, like Iria mentioned, like the way that we perceive things, and the tools that we can use became much more clearer to me at that moment in time. Even though, right, in the United States with the previous president, there was an attack on the mail, on US mail, right, at the same time. So there was a bunch, and also we had the Black Lives Matters movement and uprising at the same time. So it really sort of like everything fell apart, and it exposed inequities. It exposed extreme and disequality, right? So food was, I used it as a form to connect and to sort of like heal and mend and create this connectivity. And I feel like I found a community within the pandemic, but also the fact, like you mentioned, Natalie, the fact that all of us were sharing an experience at the same time in different spaces and different places, it sort of gave us this humanity in unison, that we can now be like, well, yeah, we see each other, like we went through it, and it sort of creates this like sisterhood, brotherhood, that where we can definitely respect each other a little bit more, or at least I hope.
I hope.
Right? Yeah.
I think that's the key, isn't it? I love that term, humanity in unison. I'm totally stealing that, and I'm going to use it.
All yours.
We hope, and I think maybe this is really the takeaway for this project. The audience today is sort of, you know, the call to action to keep this sense of community going. As difficult and exhausted as we're becoming, you know, we probably have all experienced natural disasters in our islands as well. We've come through major storms, and that initial aftermath, you're sort of charged with adrenaline, you know, you've got to get through it. But it's the lengthy period afterwards when we're still not back to normal. Not that we want to go back to normal. That's, as you said, one of the positive takeaways in the pandemic. It's brought to light, and it's pushed to the forefront so many changes that we need to see. But it's holding on to that when we get exhausted in this moment, isn't it? I want to open up the floor. Elizabeth was going to help me in case we have questions. We've got some great comments. I don't have their questions. We're obviously doing a great job because people don't have any questions. I do want to say, I want to read out a couple of these quotes. Lisa Howie, who's a really dynamic curator from Bermuda, who's just started the Atlantic World Art Fair again, another really innovative project that's come through the pandemic, and, you know, really about a sense of community and networking. Lisa says it was a real pleasure to learn about your projects. Yeah, so that's a really nice some feedback from the audience. Elizabeth, I'm just going to ask you to let me know whether we have other questions that I can't see, not being very good at the tech side of these panels.
Hi everyone. I actually do not have any questions in the chat. I was sort of hoping that there'd be some in the question and answer, but I'm not seeing any in there either.
I think sometimes that's a great sign of a good conversation, but I do want to, because we just have a few minutes left, I want to open up the floor again, if, you know, either pulling out the themes that we just talked about, or if there's something else that we haven't even discussed. One of the things that I'm interested in as an art museum director is, again, how museums who traditionally can be quite removed from the creativity of art. Ours is a little bit different because we were an education project first that became a museum secondhand, so we're sort of back to front. But how museums or institutions right now can really kind of flip their practice and embrace working more directly with artists in this moment, because it seems to me the perfect opportunity to really activate programming that might have become stagnant pre-COVID, or actually taking the types of themes that we've just been talking about out really into the community through partnerships between artists and the museum sector itself, whether those are art museums, natural history museums, science centers, you name it. I think that could be great for our audience, many of whom are museum professionals, to hear from you guys directly on. CK, go for it, because you were last time.
Oh, I go for it. Yeah.
I saw your hand, so go for it.
But I was also responding to Jemima, because I was like, she has her hand up.
Okay.
Yeah, Jemima, go for it.
Okay. Well, actually, something interesting did happen the latter half of the second lockdown. So the former gallery that represented me contacted me and asked, would I like to coordinate some workshops? So with some of the clients who had bought work from the galleries, trying to keep them in the loop still because everything was closed down. So they were asking different artists, would they want to do some workshops? So teaching their children, whoever wanted to be part of these workshops, run some of the workshops. And I was doing one for like the majority of the summer last year. So I was helping a lot of like the A-level students who were going through exams. So as a figurative artist, I mean, actually, ironically, there's not that many figurative artists anymore. So I'm kind of like in the last breed of figurative artists. So I was asked happily, and I took that on, and I really, really enjoyed it. I was working with like different age groups, and yeah, so I got to do like technique classes, and they lasted like nearly 2 hours, so they were really fun. And I thought it was a really great way to encourage and to open up galleries and museums for lots of people who wouldn't normally, because galleries anyway, they're really great places to go to. I love going to a gallery, but it's not very interactive.
Right.
You know, the pieces, you have to stand about 2 feet away from them. You can't touch them. People really want to be engaged with the piece. And so when an artist kind of comes alive and is there like working with you, it was really, really fun. And I thought it was a really nice idea, because in my actual working history, I used to be a workshop coordinator. I used to work with people with mental health, and I used to do work at the university here and run wellbeing workshops. So it was actually to help people who were suffering or, you know, stressed. And I was running like these little technique workshops. So it was quite nice. It kind of came full circle, and just being able to be at home and do like Zoom workshops with students and teach them how to draw a head and focus on like how to focus objectively and to have like a beginning, a middle, and an end. Like, you know, a painting is like a story. You don't actually have to tell the story. It's important that you invite the viewer to have their own understanding. And it's really nice that everyone has their own collective story and can narrate the piece for you. And it kind of really gets everybody engaged. And I think it's really important, actually. It would be nice if something like that could continue.
Yep. You're right, a platform for discussion. That's almost a vehicle through which to then unpack this sort of collective grief, exhaustion, anxiety. Absolutely.
Right.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so as I had more of a question, but as somebody who also works within museums, I, on and off, I have sort of throughout the pandemic, have this like model that keeps on ringing in my head. It's like human over object, human over anything, basically, right? So it's like we should start cherishing human life and community first, rather than trying to save the institution and or the object. And that's sort of been a learning curve that I've had throughout the past 2 years. So I was going to ask you, Natalie, like in your practice within museums, what has been something that has like shifted and or changed throughout the pandemic?
Great question. Put me on the spot. I'm just kidding. Absolutely. And I think, you know, my approach to, I trained as a museum director in the kind of early 2000s. So already even the training around what I was doing was very different than 2 or 3 years before that, which was much more about sort of care, protect, close off. And I studied in London, actually, Jemima. And, you know, it was under the new Labour government, and you couldn't get grants unless you were creating community engagement programs. So that's really at the core of, I hope, how I've led my practice as a director. So say in lockdown, before lockdown, we had started exploring things like online learning, but in a very limited way. But we have several islands in the Cayman Islands. There's 2 other outer islands. And our team are very, very committed to ensuring that whatever we do is accessible to those islands as well. And so we started exploring ways of sort of decentralizing the work that we were doing. And we just had to push into sort of practice very, very quickly. But we'd already done a few virtual tours. We were looking at online learning for schools. And our art museum is relatively young. It's maybe 20 years old as well. It didn't come with a national collection. We built a collection, again, back to front. So I think because of all of those things, it's allowed us to be very responsive. You know, if we do a project and someone else picked it up, we're ready to move on to the next kind of area of community engagement. And we do about 25 workshops and lectures a month. And again, Jemima, like your history, going into work with people that maybe are in seniors' homes or different wellness spaces. We've worked for 15 years in both the prisons in Cayman as well on a weekly basis. So we're already quite a flexible museum. It's weird. I don't even like to use the word museum sometimes. But I think the takeaways for us is creating a permanent hybrid between the online, so that people in our outer districts and our outer islands have really quality access to the collections. We uploaded probably 75% of our collection online during lockdown. I have a team of 10 and they're amazing. And then more recently, coming out of lockdown, you know, we went out into the community and asked people what they needed. And we now have a wellness program that includes meditation, yoga. We were doing a bit of that, but not weekly. So that's really become our primary focus in the last kind of 12 months. But along with, again, increased art classes for teens, particularly, that are having a challenging time, by collaborating with an amazing foundation called the Alex Panson Foundation, which is again about teen mental wellness generally, and of course exacerbated again by the pandemic. So we're tiny, but I think because we don't have this very long traumatic history as an institution that has a collection that needs to be completely revisited, it has allowed us to be experimental. And not everything works, but you know, we try and be responsive. And it's still a learning process, I think, for all of us, because this entire world is different. But I would say the work that you're all doing in terms of engagement, even Iria processing, the work that you've done moved me so much today when you were talking about it. These kind of opportunities, whether that's collective or an individual piece that we can respond to, has so much power, I think, in this moment. And the sharing of that as widely as we possibly can, I think, is the most critical thing that we can do right now. I hope that kind of answered the question.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. Yes.
Oh, my pleasure. And actually, I'm going to do a massive plug for the MAC conference that's coming up, because there are scholarships available to anyone. It's an online conference, but my colleague is going to be talking about the wellness program. And I'm sharing a panel with some amazing curators to talk about online learning and the kind of the good points, the bad points, what we've discovered, and how we can flip that for small museums, particularly across the region with very, very small budgets, I would also argue, because if you're the Met, and you know, you can do great things if you've got big budgets, but how do you adapt if you don't? We're coming very close to the end of our session. I don't know if anyone else wants to say a couple of words before we wrap up today. If not, I just want to say a huge thank you. You know, to reiterate what we've said about networking and community, it's been so exciting to kind of get to know each of your work and actually to speak to you today. And I know I'm going to be able to take that network long into the future and continue to follow your practice, and probably call you if I need some advice in the work that you're working on, or you know, look at exhibition opportunities, etc. So I'm very energized by these kind of platforms and processes. I hope the audience has been today. You can watch this recording probably in a couple of weeks on the MAC website, along with one from our French-speaking colleagues out of Guadeloupe that was moderated by Katarina Jacobson from the MAC board. We heard from Nyasha Warren with a Spanish-speaking group of artists that's also translated into English. And again, the curators themselves are also up on the website too. So do get to know some of the other amazing artists in this exhibition. This is MAC's first online exhibition, but we really hope that we can continue this Pan-Caribbean platform and continue working with so many artists. And you know, there are other great platforms out there that are doing similar work right now. Catapult, I think some of you are engaged in with Kingston Creative. They have a conference coming up tomorrow, which I definitely recommend you check out. Tilting Axis is still online. It's a group that I've been involved with for many years. So just again, looking for those networks. But I do want to say a big thank you again to MAC for organizing this, to our sponsors today, the Diaspora Cultural Vibe Incubator, and the amazing Rosie Gordon-Wallace, who is a champion for all of us working in the Caribbean, National Gallery of Bahamas, sorry, National Art Gallery of the Bahamas, National Gallery of the Cayman Islands, and also Memorial Act in Guadeloupe. So thank you all. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you to the audience as well for being there to listen to us today. Have a great evening, everybody. If I can ask the panelists to stay on so we can get a picture with Jemima here, because we got one before. Elizabeth, I don't know if you can close out our audience or stop our recording now. And then we'll try and get another photograph now we've got Jemima with us.
I can stop the recording.